The most dangerous warrior is the one who never needs to prove it. The words drifted through the vast stone arena like a whisper carried by the mountain wind, though no one could tell who had spoken them. Thousands of voices drowned beneath roaring laughter as banners from every northern territory rippled beneath a clear autumn sky. The annual gathering of the Alphas had begun, drawing champions, nobles, generals, and spectators from hundreds of miles away. Towering stands circled the legendary proving grounds where countless reputations had been forged, and every eye was fixed on the warriors whose polished armor gleamed beneath the morning sun. It was the one day each year when the strongest Alphas measured their skill before kings, queens, and rival packs, earning honor without spilling needless blood. Every challenger arrived expecting glory. No one expected history. At the edge of the arena gates stood Princess Evelyn Ashford, her silver breastplate reflecting soft streaks of daylight, while a deep blue cloak rested quietly across her shoulders. Her long ivory blonde hair was woven into a practical braid instead of an elaborate royal style, and the simple leather gloves covering her hands showed the faint marks of years spent training rather than attending lavish celebrations. She looked every bit the daughter of a royal house, yet there was something strangely calm about her that refused to match the excitement surrounding the tournament. Resting against her hip was a beautifully crafted sword inside an ornate scabbard engraved with ancient wolves and oak leaves, but her hand never reached for its hilt. She simply watched the arena as if she had already seen everything that was about to happen. Around her, seasoned alpha warriors exchanged amused glances before quietly chuckling among themselves. One towering competitor nudged another with his elbow and nodded toward the princess. Did they invite royalty to hand out trophies? He joked, earning another wave of laughter. A younger alpha folded his arms and grinned. Maybe she got lost on the way to a banquet. Even several visiting nobles smiled politely, convinced the elegant princess had come merely to honor tradition rather than compete. No one noticed that the veteran judges sitting beneath the royal pavilion had suddenly grown silent. High above the arena, seated upon a carved stone balcony overlooking every corner of the grounds, Alpha King Kale Thornridge observed the gathering without expression. His silver-gray eyes missed very little, and while others dismissed the princess with casual amusement, he found himself studying the unusual stillness surrounding her. Every fighter entering the arena carried restless energy, small adjustments of armor, anxious breaths, eager glances toward future opponents. Princess Evelyn displayed none of those signs. She stood with effortless balance, breathing slowly as though the cheers, horns, and endless conversations belonged to another world entirely. Kale leaned forward ever so slightly. Warriors trained by fear often looked tense. Warriors trained by confidence often appeared proud. But warriors trained by absolute discipline, they looked exactly like her. A ceremonial horn echoed across the valley, silencing the crowd one section at a time until thousands of spectators waited in complete anticipation. The Grand Marshal stepped onto the center platform and welcomed every challenger before announcing that all competitors would demonstrate their strength according to the oldest laws of honor. As each name was called, champions proudly stepped into the arena, drawing applause from their supporters. Finally, the Marshal raised the final scroll. Representing House Ashford, Princess Evelyn Ashford. The crowd responded with scattered applause mixed with puzzled murmurs. Evelyn walked onto the polished stone with calm, measured steps, every movement graceful without appearing rehearsed. She reached the center circle, paused for only a heartbeat, then slowly unfastened the sword from her belt. Thousands expected steel to flash into the sunlight. Instead, she carefully placed the sheathed weapon upright against a stone marker at the edge of the arena and stepped away from it. Confused whispers spread through the audience like wind moving through tall grass. One alpha laughed loudly enough for nearby sections to hear. She forgot her sword. Evelyn looked toward the circle where every challenger would soon stand, her blue eyes steady and unshaken. Then, with quiet certainty that somehow carried farther than a shout, she said, "I won't be needing it." The laughter that followed shook the entire arena, but somewhere above the noise, Alpha King Kale stopped smiling before anyone else realized there had never been a joke. The laughter lingered long after Princess Evelyn Ashford stepped away from her sheathed sword, rolling through the grand arena in waves as though every spectator had agreed upon the same joke. Warriors shook their heads with confident smiles, merchants exchanged amused remarks, and even several visiting nobles covered quiet chuckles behind gloved hands. To them, the princess had made the greatest mistake any challenger could make before the first contest had even begun. Yet Evelyn did not glance toward the crowd. She remained standing inside the white stone circle with relaxed shoulders and steady breathing, her hands resting naturally at her sides instead of preparing for combat. It was an unusual kind of confidence, one that refused to demand attention yet somehow drew every eye toward her. The Grand Marshal studied her for several long moments before stepping forward. "Princess Evelyn," he announced carefully. "The rules allow every challenger to choose any approved weapon. You may retrieve your sword before the opening demonstration begins." Evelyn offered a respectful nod. "Thank you, Marshal, but my decision is final." Another wave of murmurs swept across the stands. One decorated alpha from the Western Territories folded his arms with a broad grin. "She believes this is a lesson in diplomacy." Another laughed. "Perhaps she intends to negotiate us into surrender." Nearby competitors joined the growing amusement, each convinced that confidence without visible strength could only end in embarrassment. Only one voice remained silent. From the royal balcony, Alpha King Cale Thornridge continued watching every movement the princess made. He noticed details no one else seemed interested in. She had not once shifted her weight nervously. She had not searched the faces of the audience for approval. She had not glanced toward her sword after leaving it behind. Every choice appeared intentional. That alone was enough to quiet his curiosity into focused attention. The opening exhibition followed centuries of tradition. Before official contests began, challengers demonstrated composure, awareness, and discipline through a sequence of ceremonial trials rather than direct confrontation. They were simple exercises designed to reveal character more than physical ability. Experienced competitors usually completed them quickly before earning applause from the crowd. Evelyn became the final participant to enter the polished stone course lined with carved pillars, narrow pathways, and raised platforms. A bell rang softly across the arena. The first challenge required each participant to cross a winding path, while maintaining perfect balance above shallow reflecting pools. Earlier challengers had rushed through with athletic confidence, drawing cheers for speed alone. Evelyn moved differently. Every step appeared unhurried, almost effortless, as though she were following music no one else could hear. She reached the opposite side neither first nor last, yet not a single ripple disturbed the glass-like surface beneath her feet. Several judges exchanged surprised glances. The second challenge required competitors to identify hidden signals placed throughout the course, symbols representing judgment, restraint, courage, and wisdom. Many warriors overlooked smaller details while searching for obvious answers. Evelyn quietly paused beside a weathered pillar, brushed a layer of dust from an ancient carving, and identified every symbol without hesitation. A gray-haired judge slowly lowered his notes and whispered to the official beside him. She studied the original code, not the revised version. The official blinked in disbelief. Very few people still know it exists. The crowd had begun to notice something changing, although few understood exactly what they were seeing. The laughter became quieter. Conversations grew shorter. Even those who had dismissed her moments earlier now watched with cautious interest. She was not displaying remarkable strength. She was revealing something rarer: precision, patience, understanding. When the ceremonial bell sounded once more, the Grand Marshal stepped forward with an expression that no longer carried polite amusement. Instead, he offered the princess a respectful inclination of his head before announcing that the formal challenges would begin. Across the arena, one celebrated alpha champion smiled confidently as he entered the waiting circle, clearly expecting an easy victory. Evelyn met his gaze with calm blue eyes, then gently folded her hands behind her back. She still stood several yards away from the sword resting untouched against the stone marker, exactly where she had left it. And for the very first time that morning, Alpha King Cale found himself wondering whether leaving the blade behind had never been a handicap at all, but the opening move of a strategy no one else had recognized. The arena settled into an expectant silence as the first official challenger stepped across the polished stone. His name was Cedric Holloway, a celebrated alpha whose victories had earned admiration throughout the Western territories. Tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in polished bronze armor trimmed with crimson, he carried himself with the relaxed confidence of someone who had rarely known defeat. He stopped several feet from Princess Evelyn Ashford and offered a courteous bow that balanced tradition with unmistakable confidence. "Your Highness," he said with an easy smile, "there is still time to retrieve your sword." Evelyn returned the bow with equal respect. "I appreciate your concern." Cedric glanced toward the untouched weapon resting beside the stone marker. "You may regret this decision." Her expression never changed. "Only if I forget why I made it." The Grand Marshal stepped between them and raised one hand. "By the ancient laws of the gathering, this contest shall be decided by control, discipline, and clear advantage. The first competitor to demonstrate unquestionable superiority shall advance." A ceremonial bell echoed through the valley. Cedric moved first, not recklessly but with measured confidence, circling the white stone ring while studying Evelyn from every angle. Spectators leaned forward, expecting the princess to reach instinctively for the sword she had abandoned. She did not move. Instead, she quietly matched his pace, maintaining the same comfortable distance no matter where he stepped. It was almost impossible to notice at first, but Alpha King Cale Thornridge recognized the subtle pattern immediately. She was not following Cedric. She was guiding him. Cedric smiled again, believing hesitation had revealed uncertainty. He shifted direction unexpectedly, hoping to force an opening. Evelyn adjusted with effortless precision, her footsteps remaining light and perfectly balanced. Dust barely lifted beneath her boots. Another change. Cedric increased his pace, testing angles, searching for weakness. Again she answered without urgency, never rushing, never retreating, simply allowing the space between them to remain exactly where she wanted it. Murmurs spread through the audience. One elderly instructor frowned thoughtfully. "She is reading him before he moves." Another shook his head. "No, she already knows where he wants to be." The difference was subtle, but experienced warriors understood its meaning. Cedric finally paused, realizing he had spent nearly a minute trying to create an advantage without finding one. The confident smile slowly faded from his face, replaced by concentration. For the first time that morning, he looked less like a champion demonstrating his skill and more like a student attempting to solve an unfamiliar lesson. Evelyn remained completely composed. Her breathing stayed slow and even. Her blue eyes never carried mockery or pride, only quiet focus. She was not trying to embarrass her opponent. She seemed determined to understand him. The silence around the arena deepened. Thousands of spectators who had arrived expecting displays of strength now found themselves captivated by something they could barely explain. Nothing dramatic had happened, yet everyone felt the balance of the contest shifting. Cedric suddenly stepped toward a narrow section of the circle bordered by engraved stones. Evelyn stopped immediately instead of following. The alpha hesitated for the smallest fraction of a second before glancing down. His polished boot rested directly on an ancient boundary marker carved into the arena centuries earlier. A low gasp swept through the judges. The Grand Marshal raised his staff. Contest concluded. Cedric looked around in genuine confusion. Concluded? The oldest judge rose slowly from his seat. The challenger has willingly surrendered the center line, leaving the circle under his opponent's complete control. According to the first articles of the gathering, that is a decisive loss of position. Realization crossed Cedric's face. He had not been overpowered. He had been patiently led exactly where Evelyn wanted him to stand. He looked back at the princess, then lowered his head with sincere respect. "You never intended to defeat me," he said quietly. Evelyn answered with a gentle smile. "No, I hoped you would see the path before reaching the edge." For several heartbeats, the arena remained completely silent. Then, instead of laughter, respectful applause began rising from one section after another until it echoed through the mountains. High above them, Cale remained seated, his silver eyes fixed on the woman who had won her first contest without touching a weapon, without raising her voice, and without making anyone feel small. And in that moment, he realized the most remarkable thing about Princess Evelyn Ashford was not how easily she earned victory, but how naturally she inspired respect from the very people who had expected her to fail. Respect spread through the arena far more quietly than laughter ever had. The applause slowly faded, replaced by thoughtful conversations that drifted across the stone terraces. Warriors who had mocked Princess Evelyn Ashford only minutes earlier now watched her with careful attention, searching for the secret they believed they must have missed. Some insisted the first contest had been nothing more than luck. Others argued that Cedric Holloway had simply underestimated his opponent. Yet the oldest instructors sitting beneath the royal pavilion exchanged knowing glances without speaking. They had spent decades studying every school of strategy across the northern kingdoms, and none of them could name the discipline Evelyn had demonstrated. The Grand Marshal raised his staff once again. The second challenge will begin immediately. A new competitor entered the circle. Rowan Mercer was not the largest alpha present, nor the most celebrated, but his reputation rested upon exceptional awareness and tactical judgment. He was known for solving impossible battlefield problems long before others recognized danger. If anyone could expose weakness hidden beneath the princess's calm exterior, many believed it would be him. Rowan approached with genuine respect and offered a courteous smile. "Your first victory was impressive, Princess. I hope you will allow me to learn something today." Evelyn inclined her head. "Then let us both leave wiser than we arrived." The simple exchange surprised many in the audience. There was no arrogance between them, only quiet professionalism. When the ceremonial bell sounded again, Rowan did not circle her as Cedric had done. Instead, he remained completely still, refusing to be drawn into unnecessary movement. The arena became remarkably quiet. Two disciplined minds faced one another without haste, almost as though an invisible conversation had already begun. Several impatient spectators shifted in their seats, expecting someone to act first. No one did. Alpha King Cale Thornridge rested one hand against the carved stone railing as his attention sharpened even further. Most competitors viewed silence as empty space waiting to be filled. Evelyn seemed to treat silence as information. Nearly 30 seconds passed before Rowan finally smiled. "You are waiting for me to reveal my intention." Evelyn answered softly. "No. I am waiting until you decide which intention truly belongs to you." The words lingered in the crisp mountain air. Rowan blinked once, then laughed with genuine admiration. Very few people noticed the difference. He took 3 measured steps toward the eastern edge of the circle before stopping beside a weathered stone column decorated with faded carvings. Instead of responding directly, Evelyn slowly walked toward a different pillar several yards away. The distance between them remained balanced, neither closing nor widening. The judges leaned forward. One elderly scholar quietly whispered. She selected the stronger position without challenging him for it. Another nodded. She understands the architecture. Rowan looked around the arena for the first time since entering the circle. His expression changed almost immediately. The afternoon sun had shifted higher above the mountains, casting long shadows from each carved pillar across the polished stone floor. Evelyn now stood where every important approach remained visible, while the shadow beside Rowan partially concealed his own view. He smiled to himself, recognizing what had happened. She had not manipulated him. She had allowed the arena itself to teach the lesson. Rowan slowly stepped away from the pillar and bowed deeply before the assembled judges. "I concede the advantage." Confused murmurs swept through the audience. The Grand Marshal looked toward him carefully. "State your reason." Rowan turned toward the spectators instead of the officials. A true strategist does not merely observe the battlefield. She understands how time changes it. While I searched for my next move, Princess Evelyn noticed the movement of the sun, the position of every shadow, and the direction from which every challenger would naturally approach. I entered this contest believing I was studying her. In truth, she had been studying everything. Silence settled over the arena once more before warm applause rose from every corner. This time it sounded different. It carried admiration instead of surprise. Even those who still questioned Evelyn's methods could no longer dismiss her accomplishments as coincidence. Above the gathering, Cale slowly rose from his seat for the first time that day. His advisors immediately noticed the movement, exchanging puzzled looks among themselves. The Alpha King rarely stood before the final rounds of any tournament. Yet his attention never left the quiet princess whose sword remained untouched beside the stone marker, because with every passing challenge he became more certain that the greatest weapon she possessed had never been forged from steel at all. By late afternoon, the atmosphere inside the mountain arena had changed so completely that newcomers arriving through the outer gates would never have believed the same crowd had laughed at Princess Evelyn Ashford only hours earlier. Conversations no longer revolved around whether she belonged among the competitors. Instead, every question carried the same quiet mystery. Where had she learned to think this way? Merchants abandoned their market stalls for a better view. Young squires leaned over the stone railings, repeating every move they had witnessed as though trying to memorize a lesson that had never appeared in any training manual. Even veteran commanders who had spent decades studying military history struggled to explain what they had seen. It was as though the princess was competing according to a forgotten set of rules that everyone had once known, but no one could remember. High above the arena, Alpha King Cale Thornridge remained standing beside the carved balcony, his silver eyes following Evelyn as attendants prepared the next sequence of challenges. One of his senior advisors stepped closer and spoke quietly. "Your Majesty, shall I have our scholars identify her instructor?" Cale kept his attention on the arena below. "Do not ask who trained her." The advisor looked puzzled. "Then what should we discover?" Cale answered without hesitation. "Find out who taught an entire generation to forget what she still remembers." The words lingered between them, leaving the advisor with more questions than answers. Down below, the Grand Marshal announced a special examination reserved only for competitors who had demonstrated extraordinary discipline. Instead of facing another single challenger, Evelyn would be presented with a series of complex situations requiring immediate judgment. The first involved a carefully arranged display of carved markers representing villages, forests, rivers, and mountain passes. Officials described changing weather, limited supplies, and families needing safe passage before winter storms arrived. Most spectators expected a lengthy explanation. Evelyn studied the display for only a few quiet moments before gently moving a single marker less than 6 inches. Every judge leaned forward. The oldest among them slowly smiled. "By protecting one bridge instead of 3, he whispered, "every village remains connected." Another judge nodded with visible admiration. "She solved the entire problem without expanding the defense." Warm applause echoed through the arena once again. The second examination followed immediately. A messenger entered carrying sealed letters bearing the crests of neighboring kingdoms. The scenario described rising tension between allies after a misunderstanding threatened years of peace. Competitors were asked to choose which letter should be answered first. Many observers assumed the most powerful kingdom deserved immediate attention. Evelyn quietly selected the smallest seal instead. The judges exchanged surprised glances. "Please explain," the Grand Marshal requested. Evelyn smiled gently. "The strongest friend can afford patience. The quietest friend often cannot. If trust disappears there, every larger alliance weakens with it." For several seconds no one spoke. Then the royal historians began writing as quickly as their hands could move. Across the audience, older veterans slowly nodded to themselves. They recognized wisdom earned through experience rather than ambition. The final examination appeared almost disappointingly simple. An attendant placed a beautifully crafted ceremonial sword upon a polished wooden stand only a few feet from Evelyn. "Princess," the Grand Marshal announced, "this challenge has no hidden rules. If you believe your previous decision should change, you may claim this weapon before the final rounds." Thousands of eyes turned toward her. The entire arena seemed to hold its breath. Evelyn walked toward the stand until she was close enough to see every intricate engraving along the shining scabbard. She rested one hand lightly above the hilt, but never touched it. Instead, she looked toward the spectators filling every level of the arena. "A sword is a promise," she said softly. "It should be carried with purpose, not because others expect to see it." She lowered her hand and stepped away. The silence that followed felt deeper than any applause. No one laughed. No one questioned her choice. One by one, the competitors who had once doubted her lowered their heads in quiet respect, and from the highest balcony Alpha King Cale realized the greatest change had not happened within Princess Evelyn at all. It had happened within every person watching her, because without raising a weapon or demanding admiration, she had quietly transformed an arena built to celebrate strength into a place where wisdom had become the highest victory. As the golden light of late afternoon stretched across the ancient arena, The tournament paused for the traditional hour of reflection, a custom older than any kingdom represented within the stone walls. Competitors gathered beneath shaded pavilions, scholars debated quietly over handwritten notes, and servants carried fresh water through the winding corridors that circled the proving grounds. Yet one question traveled faster than every conversation combined. Who had taught Princess Evelyn Ashford to see the world so differently? The mystery reached every corner of the gathering until even children repeated stories they had only half understood. Some believed she had studied under forgotten philosophers hidden beyond the northern mountains. Others whispered that she had learned from wandering guardians who no longer accepted students. Each theory became more extraordinary than the last, but none satisfied the growing curiosity. High above the arena, Alpha King Cale Thornridge dismissed his attendants with a single nod before walking alone through the upper gallery overlooking the ancient grounds. He stopped before a weathered stone mural carved centuries earlier, its faded images depicting wolves standing beside men and women rather than above them. Most visitors admired it only as decoration. Cale had spent his childhood listening to stories hidden within those carvings. His grandfather had once pointed toward the oldest figure and quietly said, "There was a time when the greatest leaders won loyalty before they ever won a contest." As the memory returned, Cale looked back toward the arena below where Evelyn remained standing beside the same untouched sword. Something about her presence stirred that forgotten lesson with remarkable clarity. Moments later, his oldest advisor approached, carrying several weathered scrolls gathered from the royal archives. "Your Majesty," the advisor said carefully, "we searched every military academy, every noble household, and every record of distinguished instructors. No one claims Princess Evelyn as a student." Cale accepted one of the scrolls and slowly unrolled it across the stone railing. Inside appeared faded sketches illustrating battlefield formations abandoned generations earlier because they required patience instead of speed. He studied the delicate drawings before asking quietly, "Did you search beyond the academies?" The advisor hesitated. "Beyond them." Cale nodded toward the ancient mural. "Look among the traditions that people stopped believing were practical." That evening, the royal librarians descended into the oldest archive beneath the mountain fortress, where shelves untouched for decades held records few scholars remembered existed. Dust floated through narrow beams of light as one elderly keeper carefully opened a cedar chest bound with iron. Inside rested a collection of brittle journals written by commanders whose names had nearly disappeared from history. One passage immediately captured his attention. It described a legendary order whose members believed that true mastery began long before any contest. They trained observation before movement, restraint before action, understanding before authority. Their symbol had not been a drawn sword, but a sheathed one. The old keeper's hands trembled slightly as he carried the journal toward the palace above. Back in the arena, the evening bell announced the return of the competitors. Spectators eagerly reclaimed their seats while anticipation settled across the mountains once again. Evelyn calmly stepped into the fading sunlight exactly as she had throughout the day, showing neither excitement nor anxiety. Her expression remained peaceful, as though each challenge simply offered another opportunity to learn. Cale watched her with growing certainty. It was no longer curiosity that held his attention. It was recognition. Not recognition of the woman herself, but of an idea the kingdoms had almost forgotten. As the elderly librarian hurried across the royal balcony, carrying the weathered journal, Cale accepted it without speaking. He opened to the marked page and immediately froze. Drawn in faded ink beside the ancient passage was the same elegant wolf entwined with oak leaves that adorned the scabbard of Princess Evelyn Ashford's untouched sword. For the first time that day, the Alpha King realized he was no longer watching an extraordinary competitor. He was witnessing the return of a legacy that history itself had nearly allowed to disappear. The final light of day painted the mountain peaks in shades of amber and gold as the gathering returned to complete the last trials before sunset. A cool breeze carried the scent of pine through the open arena, and for the first time since the tournament had begun, no one spoke Princess Evelyn Ashford's name with doubt. Instead, every conversation carried quiet respect mixed with growing curiosity. She had answered every challenge without relying on force, and yet no one could deny the results. The untouched sword remained standing beside the weathered stone marker exactly where she had placed it that morning, becoming a silent symbol that every spectator noticed whenever their eyes drifted toward the center of the arena. Alpha King Cale Thornridge descended from the royal balcony, drawing immediate attention from nobles and warriors alike. It was uncommon for the king to leave his place before the final ceremony, and whispers followed him as he crossed the polished stone walkway leading toward the competitor's pavilion. Evelyn looked up as he approached, offering the same respectful bow she had shown every challenger throughout the day. Cale returned the gesture with equal courtesy before speaking. "Princess Evelyn, would you honor me with a conversation?" She smiled gently. A conversation is always an honor when both people arrive willing to listen. They walked together beneath an ancient row of oak trees overlooking the arena while the crowd remained at a respectful distance. Neither hurried to fill the silence. It felt natural, almost comfortable, as though each understood that meaningful words should never race ahead of thoughtful minds. Finally, Cale held up the weathered journal that had been discovered in the royal archives. "I believe this belongs to your history," he said quietly. Evelyn glanced toward the faded drawing on the open page, where a wolf intertwined with oak leaves matched the crest engraved upon her sword. Her expression softened with recognition. I wondered if anyone still remembered. Cale studied her carefully. Very few do. She rested one hand lightly against the old journal without taking it from him. "When I was a little girl, my grandfather told me that our family protected more than land or titles. We protected a way of thinking. He believed that wisdom should always arrive before power, because power without wisdom eventually forgets why it exists." Her voice carried no pride, only quiet gratitude for lessons that had shaped her life. Cale listened without interruption. "The journals call your order forgotten." Evelyn looked toward the arena where competitors prepared for the evening ceremonies. Forgotten does not always mean lost. Sometimes it simply means no one has practiced the lesson for a very long time. A gentle smile crossed Cale's face. Then perhaps today reminded people that the lesson still matters. Evelyn nodded almost imperceptibly. "That was my hope." The evening breeze stirred the oak leaves above them, filling the quiet moment with a soft rustling that seemed older than either kingdom. Cale closed the journal slowly. "May I ask one question?" Evelyn met his eyes. "Of course. If your family carried such remarkable knowledge, why did you never reveal it before today?" She looked beyond the arena toward distant mountains glowing beneath the setting sun. "Because knowledge offered to people who are not ready becomes another reason to argue. Knowledge discovered through experience becomes something they choose to protect." Cale remained silent for several thoughtful seconds before offering a respectful inclination of his head. In that single answer, he recognized the difference between seeking admiration and serving a purpose greater than oneself. As they returned toward the arena, word of their meeting spread quietly through the gathered spectators. No dramatic announcement had been made. No secret had been declared aloud. Yet something had changed. Warriors who had once measured greatness by victory alone now found themselves speaking about patience, humility, and judgment with equal admiration. The forgotten legacy had begun awakening not because someone demanded it, but because one woman had lived it openly. As the final ceremonial bell echoed across the valley, Cale realized the greatest challenge of the day still waited ahead, for before the tournament ended he intended to stand across from Princess Evelyn himself, not to prove who was stronger, but to discover whether two people guided by wisdom could reveal an even greater truth together. Evening settled gently over the mountain arena as hundreds of lanterns flickered to life along the ancient stone walls, bathing the gathering in warm golden light. The final ceremony of the tournament was meant to celebrate every competitor who had demonstrated exceptional honor. But before the closing procession could begin, the Grand Marshal stepped into the center of the arena and raised his ceremonial staff. A quiet expectation spread through the crowd as every conversation slowly faded. "By the authority entrusted to this gathering," he announced, "Alpha King Cale Thornridge has requested one final demonstration." Thousands of eyes immediately turned toward the royal platform. Cale walked into the arena without armor, wearing only a dark ceremonial cloak fastened with the silver crest of his house. There was no display of power in his steps, only calm purpose. When he reached the center circle, he stopped several yards from Princess Evelyn Ashford and offered a respectful bow that surprised everyone watching. "Princess Evelyn," he said, his voice carrying easily through the silent arena. "Today you have challenged more than competitors. You have challenged the beliefs we carried into this place. May I ask for one final lesson?" Evelyn returned the bow with equal grace. "Only if we learn from one another." A quiet smile crossed Kale's face. "That is exactly what I hoped you would say." The Grand Marshal explained that this final demonstration would have no judges and no declared winner. It would simply allow two remarkable leaders to reveal their understanding before the gathered kingdoms. The arena became so still that the distant rustling of pine trees beyond the walls could be heard between steady breaths. Kale slowly walked to one side of the circle, while Evelyn remained near the weathered stone marker where her sheathed sword had rested untouched since sunrise. Neither spoke, neither hurried. They simply observed the space around them with the same patient attention that had defined the entire day. After several quiet moments, Kale smiled. "Most people believe leadership begins by taking the first step." Evelyn gently shook her head. "Sometimes leadership begins by knowing which step should never be taken." Their words settled over the audience with unexpected weight. Instead of witnessing a contest, the spectators found themselves watching two minds exploring the same truth from different paths. Kale shifted his position slightly, testing the changing balance of light and shadow across the ancient stone. Evelyn responded with one graceful step of her own, preserving the harmony between them without appearing to imitate him. Every movement resembled a thoughtful conversation rather than a competition. Then a sudden gust of mountain wind swept across the arena with surprising force. One of the ceremonial banners secured above the eastern gallery broke free from its fastening and drifted downward toward a cluster of lit lanterns decorating the edge of the arena floor. Before attendants could react, Evelyn calmly turned toward the stone marker where her sword still stood waiting. For the first time that entire day, her fingers gently wrapped around the hilt. A ripple of astonishment moved through the crowd. Slowly and with complete control, she drew the blade just far enough to guide the falling banner away from the lanterns before carefully lowering the fabric into the waiting hands of nearby attendants. The polished steel reflected the lantern light for only a brief moment before she quietly returned it to its scabbard. No dramatic flourish followed. No celebration interrupted the silence. She simply placed the sword back beside the stone marker exactly where it had stood all day. Kale watched every movement without speaking. Then he smiled with unmistakable admiration. "You carried it only when it served others." Evelyn looked toward the grateful attendants who carefully folded the rescued banner. A promise should always protect before it impresses. Those simple words echoed through the arena more deeply than any cheer. One by one, warriors, scholars, nobles, and spectators rose from their seats, not because anyone commanded them to stand, but because they understood they had witnessed something far greater than a display of skill. In the quiet glow of hundreds of lanterns, Alpha King Kale realized the lesson he had searched for since morning had finally revealed itself, and he knew that the final words spoken before the gathering ended would shape the future of every kingdom represented beneath the stars. The mountain valley fell into a silence so complete that even the lantern flames seemed to stand perfectly still. No trumpet announced the end of the gathering. No servant hurried to begin the closing celebration. Every person remained exactly where they stood, their attention resting upon Princess Evelyn Ashford and Alpha King Kale Thornridge at the center of the ancient arena. The sheathed sword rested once again beside the weathered stone marker, exactly as it had for nearly the entire day, quietly reminding everyone that its greatest purpose had not been to command attention, but to answer a moment of genuine need. Kale slowly stepped forward until he stood beside Evelyn instead of across from her. It was a simple movement, yet thousands understood its meaning immediately. They were no longer two competitors standing on opposite sides of a challenge. They were two leaders looking toward the same future. The Alpha King turned to face the gathered kingdoms, his calm voice carrying effortlessly through the cool evening air. "Today we welcome champions expecting to witness strength." He paused, allowing his words to settle across the stone terraces. "Instead, we were reminded where strength truly begins." No one interrupted. Even the youngest spectators listened with complete attention. Kale continued, Many of us believed greatness belonged to the loudest voice, the fastest victory, or the sharpest blade. Princess Evelyn has shown us something greater. Wisdom sees what pride overlooks. Patience accomplishes what haste cannot. Respect earns what fear never will. Around the arena, veteran commanders slowly lowered their heads in thoughtful agreement. Some remembered lessons taught by grandparents long gone. Others quietly realized how many important truths had disappeared beneath generations of competition. The Alpha King turned toward Evelyn with sincere admiration. Princess, you arrived carrying a sword that remained sheathed because you understood its purpose before anyone else did. You never asked this gathering to admire you. You simply invited us to remember who we were always capable of becoming. Evelyn smiled with the same quiet humility that had guided every challenge throughout the day. I did not come to change anyone, she answered gently. I only hoped that if people looked closely enough, they might discover that the best path had been beside them all along. The oldest judge in the gathering slowly rose from his seat, supported by a polished oak staff worn smooth through decades of service. His voice carried the gentle weight of experience. I have witnessed 43 gatherings of the Alphas. I have celebrated remarkable champions and honorable leaders. Yet never have I seen an arena transformed without a single display of domination. Today we leave wiser than when we arrived, and that is the rarest victory of all. Warm applause filled the valley, beginning with the judges before spreading to the competitors, the nobles, the merchants, the scholars, and finally every spectator surrounding the ancient grounds. It was not the thunderous celebration that followed dramatic triumphs. It was steadier, deeper, and somehow more meaningful, like gratitude shared by thousands of hearts at the same moment. One after another, the alpha warriors who had once laughed at Evelyn stepped forward and offered respectful bows. Cedric Holloway smiled warmly. Rowan Mercer placed one hand over his heart. Others followed without hesitation, not because tradition demanded it, but because respect had become the natural response. Above them, the first stars appeared in the clear night sky as the mountain winds carried away the echoes of the gathering. Cale gently lifted the weather journal discovered beneath the royal archives and entrusted it to Evelyn. Some legacies deserve to be remembered, he said. Evelyn accepted the journal carefully before looking across the countless faces illuminated by lantern light. She realized that the forgotten teachings of her family had not returned through speeches or grand declarations. They had returned because ordinary people had chosen to recognize them. As the ceremonial bells rang one final time, the competitors departed with more than medals or titles. They carried a new understanding that would travel home to every kingdom beyond the mountains. Long after the lanterns faded and the arena stood empty beneath the quiet stars, people would remember the day a princess walked into the gathering of the Alphas with a sheathed sword, left with the respect of every kingdom, and proved that the strongest leaders are not the ones who seek victory over others, but the ones who inspire others to become their very best.